We are still in chapter 6, Mishnah number 6 of Pirkei Avos. These are the 48 ways to wisdom, and we're up to way number 36. Velomegis libo bitalmudo. One of the ways to acquire Torah, to acquire divine wisdom, is to not be prideful and to not have a swelled heart in your study, to not allow your heart to become expanded and augmented in your studies. Don't allow your heart to become coarse and less sensitive because of your studies. Now, what exactly does this mean? And as always, we find a variety of commentaries to offer different ideas as to what exactly the Mishnah means when the Mishnah says that a way to wisdom is to not have your heart be expanded or to be comfortable in your studies. So some of the commentaries point out that this verbiage of megis libo, the word gas means to be coarse or thick, have a thick heart. What does that mean? So the commentaries point out that the Talmud uses these precise words in a different context. The Talmud uses these words to describe the difference between someone who is betrothed versus someone who is married. You have newlyweds, and they're getting comfortable with each other. But when they just meet, they're not really comfortable with it. They don't know each other. They're not really comfortable with each other. And the Talmud uses this terminology to say that when a husband and wife, they're married already, they're very familiar with each other, they're very comfortable with each other, then there are certain halachic parameters that are applied to this circumstance. When someone's dating, right? They try to be on your best behavior, portray yourself in the best light. You wouldn't say certain things without calculation. You made sure that you're behaving as well as you could possibly be to present yourself in your best fashion. Once you're married and you really know each other well, then you kind of let your guard down, and you're more comfortable, you're more homely. And the commentaries tell us, what's our relationship with Torah? In many instances in the literature, we're told that the relationship that we have with Torah is like a husband and a wife, where we got wedded together, we got bonded together at Sinai. Sinai is effectively a matrimonial ceremony. B'yom chasunaschem, on the day of your wedding, b'yom simchas libchem, on the day of your happy heart. That is a reference to the Sinai revelation. It's the day of a wedding. And it's a wedding that there's no outs to. There is no convention of divorce for this union. So we're bonded together. We have to learn to become comfortable with each other. And here we're told, with respect to the Torah, we should not reach the level of comfort that we're not tiptoeing anymore, that we're just letting loose like a veteran married couple. And the idea being is that when you're studying, you have to always remember that this is the Torah of the Almighty. This is the Torah that He had in His treasure houses for 974 generations before the creation of the world. And it's still drenched with the holiness of God. And if you're flippant in it, and you're comfortable with it, and you're lackadaisical about it, then you're not accruing to it, you're not assigning to it the proper amount of respect and seriousness. When you study, you have to study with seriousness and with gravity. And you have to realize that you're dealing with the weightiest of matters. This is the will of God. And you say, you want a ballpark thing. What difference does it really make? Does it really matter so much? You're making a determination. You're making a study, an analysis, and a determination of the will of God. That's the most important thing in the world. And just like the diplomats, when they speak, every word is measured. And you're speaking before the Supreme Court. You want to say exactly what you want to say and not more, not less. And you don't just say, what difference does it make? Let's just use slang. Here, just speak in generalities. No. You'd be very, very precise. If you're going to attempt to render any position and study in any way, in any fashion, in any manner, the Almighty's Torah, don't be flippant about it. Don't slide into a degree of comfort and familiarity, because that's not according to the Torah the requisite respect, and that can also lead to mistakes. And mistakes in the Torah are not tolerable. It's not tolerable at all. Now, if you do whatever you can, and you did all your due diligence, and you treat it with the respect that it deserves, that's one thing. We're human. That's understood. Torah's not in the heaven. We're humans. We can make mistakes. But if someone's not serious about it, and that's when they make a mistake, that is unforgivable. So that's one idea. Lo medius libo bitalmudo, when you study, you should not be one of comfort, that your heart is not, you're not so aware about what you're doing. There's another idea that the commentaries tell us. These words can also mean that your heart is content. You study a lot. You spend the whole year studying, 10 hours a day. You walk out of that and you feel, I spent a lot of time studying the Almighty's Torah. And look at me. Look how much I know, and look how special I am. And both of these are big problems. Both of these are violations of this principle. If you spend your whole life studying, I hate to say it, you spend your whole life studying, and you're serious, and you're diligent, and you're dedicated, lots of devotion to your studies, you'll end up with about a drop in the ocean of what Torah actually is. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. The Talmud gives us just a few citations, and we've talked about this in the past, of how much Torah actually is. It's a veritable ocean. How much could you scoop up from an ocean? How much have you diminished from the ocean when you take your little bucket and try to dole out some water from it? The Talmud tells the great Rabbi Akiva, when he would study the Torah scroll, so you would, obviously, we read the words, right? There's black ink on top of white parchment. You read the words, and you try to understand the words and the messages and the lessons and the laws and the commandments and the statutes. That's how we study, right? The Talmud says that when he would study not just the letters, but also the embellishments on top of the letters. You open up a Torah scroll, you see a picture of it online, you'll see that it has crowns and little jots and tittles on top of the letters. And to us, that's how you write it. It's like a serif, it's part of the font. That's what we think. But the truth is, there are secrets upon secrets and lessons upon lessons and laws upon laws in every tiny little jot and tittle of the Almighty's Torah. And Rabbi Akiva, the master, he was able to study, in the words of the Talmud, piles and piles of laws from every single quotes, from every single serif, every single jot and tittle in the Torah. Now, we don't even know what that even means. We cannot fathom, because it's just a level of mastery that's so beyond us. But even today, there are books that are published today in contemporary times that display such a scope and such a breadth and such an intensity of study that when we read it, we cannot imagine that the person who wrote it is just a human like us. We're like the same species, and they're around today. It's unfathomable. And how much they can find in one little word in the Torah. There's a book called Tikkune Zohar. Zohar. You're like, oh, okay, that's esoteric, right? Tikkune Zohar. It's a magnificent, stupendous commentary on one word. The word is Bereshis. One word. That's it. Thick book. And that's just the book. What about the commentaries in the book? You could fill a whole library with the commentaries on one book, on one word. And that's just one word. And that should not give us the impression that any other word is empty. Oh, only one. No, every single word of the Torah has enough secrets in it, if you understand it on the deepest level, which we even can't. Even Moshe couldn't understand it on the 50th level. He only understood level 49. But if you understand it in its totality, which is impossible because we're not infinite, there's books to be written on every single word in the Torah. I've referenced a book many times over the course of the years, written by an antecedent of mine. His name was Rabbi Shapiro. He lived in the end of the 1500s, beginning of the 1600s. Passed away in 1633. So he lived 400 years ago. It's a long time ago. But I'm about 14 generations from him. My grandfather is his father's father, my maternal grandfather. His name was also Shapiro Spira, really. Shapiro Spira, it's the same name. He was the rabbi of the city of Krakow. And his famous work is Megala Amukos, which translates as Megala, to reveal, Amukos, the depths. A book revealing the depths. It's about revealing the depths of the Torah. And it's 252 essays on one dialogue in the Torah. In the beginning of Parshas Va'eschanon, so at the end, at the chapters, I think it's chapter 3 and 4 of, I think it's the end of chapter 3 of Devarim, Deuteronomy, Moshe recounts his dialogue that he had with God about going into the land of Israel. I pleaded before God, let me go into the land, let me see it. And God said, no. Instead, Joshua will lead them, and you go, you can see the land, you can climb atop the mountain and visualize the land, but you may not enter it. That is the dialogue. What was behind the dialogue? What was Moshe's rationale? What was he addressing? What were his grounds for making that request? Well, obviously he wanted to go. We get that, but what's the secrets behind it? So there's 252 essays in this book. Each one is a different approach to understanding the dialogue between Moshe and God. And he effectively is able to weave together so many disparate parts of Torah into this, because all of Torah is interconnected. And even reading one of them, to properly explain it with all the introductions that you would need, it will take you hours and hours and hours and hours to read one of those essays. And some of them are so advanced that veteran students of the Torah cannot understand it. And it's written a couple hundred years ago. This same author, by the way, wrote 1,000 different interpretations on the small aleph of the word Vayikra. Vayikra is the third book of the Torah, Vayikra, Leviticus. And the word Vayikra, which is the first word of the parsha and the first word of the book, and the name of the parsha and the name of the book, Leviticus, it's 5 letters, right? Vav, Yud, Kuf, Resh, Aleph. And the Aleph is small. It's a smaller font. Why is there a smaller font Aleph in the Torah scroll in the word Vayikra? Now the word, the letter Aleph, it's the first letter of the alphabet, right? But the word Aleph also means Aleph, which means 1,000. So he says, I'm going to write a 1,000 different explanations as to why there's a small Aleph. Aleph interpretations, why there's a small Aleph. It's a level of mastery we can't even fathom. The Gaon of Vilna wrote 2260 interpretations on one verse in the book of Numbers. You study Torah. You finish the whole book of Talmud. And your heart's swelling. Look how much I know. If you do that, you won't. This is not a path to achieve Torah. Because you focus on how much you have and how much you've studied, and you feel all prideful about that. You don't realize it's endless. It's endless. And if you actually want to absorb the Almighty's Torah, to the degree that you're happy and your heart's swelling over the fact that you accomplished so much, that's going to limit and diminish your ability to actually study more. Moreover, if you're prideful in your studies, you're taking pride in the Almighty's Torah. You're taking pride because of your accomplishments. You're in effect saying tacitly that you did something you didn't need to do. And we know, if you study a lot of Torah, the Mishnah earlier in the book of Pirkei Avos tells us, don't be prideful. Ki lekach notzarta, for this you were created. This is the only reason why we're created. To have some sort of connection with the Almighty via His Torah. That's why we're here. So if you're just doing your job, it's not a reason to be prideful. And if someone is prideful, they're in trouble, because pride diminishes Torah, meaning your studies will regress if you are prideful. Kol hamisyoher, anyone who's prideful, the Talmud tells us, chachmaso mistalekes mimeno, his wisdom departs from him. When you have the Almighty's wisdom, you're harboring the Almighty's wisdom within you. You're like a vessel for the Almighty's Torah. The holiness of God is not separate from his Torah. So you're effectively like a vessel, so to speak, for the presence of God. And you're prideful. You're prideful for yourself. God says, oh, I don't want to be with you. You're prideful for yourself? I'm out. So the Torah is going to escape. And we have all these orifices where the Torah could just bolt from us. We're trying to carry it and harbor it and maintain it. And pride is like opening up all the floodgates. It's going to escape. Torah is compared to water. Water collects at the lowest point. You want to bear Torah, you have to maintain humility. And the Talmud gives us an amazing story to illustrate this. It's one of the most consequential stories of our history. And it's not well known, at least not well known enough. It's in the times of Herod the Great. What was he great about? He was great at a lot of things. Building and butchering. Because he killed like 1,000 rabbis. And he hollowed out the sages in Israel. And that's a big problem, because without Torah, we're doomed. And there was a sage who was Babylonian, who came to restore the ranks of the rabbis. And this Babylonian is one of the most important and consequential sages of all time. And his name is Hillel. Hillel the Elder. Hillel the Babylonian. Hillel. And he arrived in Israel, and he was appalled at the lack of scholarship and the lack of Torah greats. And the reason why is because Herod slaughtered them. And the people in charge were the Nisim. They were the princes, the official titular heads of the nation. They were a family called the Bnei Beseira, the sons of Beseira. And they were good people, but they were not Class A scholars. And they had a dilemma, they had a question. No one knew the answer. And the question was, what happens when the festival of Pesach falls out on Saturday night, the night after Shabbos? And of course, the day before Pesach, on Pesach, Passover Eve, that's when you slaughter the paschal sacrifice. But it's Shabbos. So you allowed to slaughter this on Shabbos or not? Some things override Shabbos, some things don't override Shabbos. Does the paschal offering override Shabbos? That was the question. No one knew the answer. And they made an announcement. Is there anyone here that knows the answer to this question? So people told him, listen, they told the Bnei Beseira, there's this man who arrived from Babylon, and his name is Hillel the Babylonian. And he had been a student of the previous sages, Shemaiah and Avtalion. And he knows the answer. So they summoned Hillel, and he says, do you know the answer to this question? Does the paschal offering override Shabbos? When Pesach is on Matzah Shabbos, on Saturday night, so it's Sunday, and the day before Pesach is Shabbos, are you allowed to slaughter the animal that we typically do on Erev Shabbos? You're allowed to do that on Erev Pesach. We typically do on Erev Pesach. Are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? So he responded, yes, you are, and brought a whole series of proofs. Proof 1, proof 2, proof 3, unimpeachable proofs. Well, okay, so now we know the answer. But this is why the story is consequential. The Bnei Beseira, the leaders of the nation, the official heads of the nation, they took the keys and they said, Hillel, you're in charge now. They abdicated the throne. And from then on, for 400 years, the titular head of the nation in the land of Israel was a direct descendant of Hillel. It was the house of Hillel. For hundreds of years, this family was in charge. And some of the great leaders, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the great Rabbi Judah the Prince, all direct descendants of Hillel, princes of the nation, because of this event, when the Bnei Beseira willingly abdicated their throne, gave the crown to Hillel. That's a very significant and consequential and radical change. And now Hillel's in charge. And what does he do? He begins to ramp up the Torah study. And he starts teaching the laws of Pesach for the entire day. So everyone knows the laws. He's instituting a different administration here. And then he began to rebuke them. He rebukes the Bnei Beseira and the rest of the people there. And he says, what caused this change in leadership? What caused for you guys to be demoted and me to be promoted? I arrived from Babylon. I'm an outsider here. And now I'm in charge. It's because you were lazy. You didn't study sufficiently. You didn't find the Torah leaders of the previous generation and study under their tutelage. So he's trying to coach them to study more. But he's, in effect, a little bit prideful that he studied under the previous administration, the previous leaders, and they didn't, and that's why he's now ascending above them. And right away, he suffered the consequences. The question was, if someone forgets to bring the knife to slaughter the animal, you forgot to bring it before Shabbos. So it is true that you can slaughter the animal, the Paschal offering, on Shabbos. But what about, can you transport the knife? We don't transport things from one domain to another on Shabbos. But here, can we transport it for the benefit, for the use of the mitzvah? That's the question they asked Hillel. And he's like, oh, I know the answer, but I forgot it. I forgot it. And Thomas says, why did he forget it? You have a little bit of pride? Right away, the Torah will escape. Now, Hillel was not prideful, as we shall see. But he had a little bit of pride, and therefore he lost a little bit of Torah. Because every bit of pride will always result in a little bit of Torah being forgotten. And he even says, I knew the law. I forgot it. Why did he forget it? Because he was prideful. And the commentaries there note that the portrait of humility, the paragon of humility, the exemplar of humility in our history is Hillel himself. When the Talmud says a person should always be humble, it says, be humble like Hillel. And it gives a whole bunch of stories of Hillel's superlative humility. So Hillel was Mr. Humble. That's what he was. But even someone like that, if you have an episode of hubris, you have an episode of pride in your Torah study, that will not spare you. Your overall humility will not spare you. You right away will forget some law. And finally, if someone, God forbid, is prideful in their studies, it can lead to very repulsive and inexcusable behavior. The Talmud tells a story of a great sage, really one of the bona fide sages of our people, who had spent a lot of time studying. And he was now leaving the study halls to travel, and he was so swelled with pride, the same words, Daito Gasa Allah, the same words that our Mishnah uses. His heart was so engorged with pride. because of all the Torah that he had studied. And he meets a person who is exceedingly ugly. We might have told the story sometime ago in the past. He meets a man who's just so ugly, so ugly. And he says to him, "Why are you so ugly? Is everyone in your town so ugly?" Now, this is not behavior that we expect of a great sage. To tell a creation of God that they're ugly, even if it's objectively true. And this person responds, "Why don't you tell the craftsman who created me that he created something ugly?" That's a sharp retort. So the great rabbi is shaken by this exchange, and gets off his donkey and he speaks to him, "Forgive me, please." And he prostrates himself on the ground, and the man refuses to forgive him. And finally, the story goes that they arrive at the town, and the townspeople beg the person to forgive him. Finally, forgives them on condition that no one else does this again in the future. It's a long story with a lot of details that are all pertinent, obviously, because he was traveling at the edge of the river on a donkey. Like, all those little tidbits are part of the secrets behind this story. But in the commentaries the commentaries say that the ugly man who taught the lesson to the great rabbi, he was none other than Elijah the prophet, masquerading as an ugly person. And he was trying to teach the great rabbi a lesson. And I think this is part of this principle number 36, to not have a swelled heart. If you do have a swelled heart as a result of your studies, well, it's a problem. You're too familiar with the studies, and you won't study enough because you think you already accomplished a lot. And if you're prideful, it's a big problem. You'll forget your Torah, but it can also lead to bad character. And it's not at all accepted for someone to be a great sage, but to not be a great person as well. The idea of creating a Chinese wall between your mind and your behavior, that is not a Jewish idea. Every sage in our history has always manifested that greatness in exemplary behavior. The idea that you could just separate what you know and what you study from how you live, how you interact with people, how you interface with the world, your character, it must be reflective of your study. That is the rule across the board. And if someone does not have great character, they're not a candidate for great Torah. They must be in sync, and they always were in sync, and they still are. Today, every great sage that you will meet, if they are truly a great sage, then they will also have exemplary character, because those two are inseparable. So this is way number 36 to Torah. V'lo medius libo b'talmudo, to not have a swelled heart in your studies. Way number 37 is very similar to the previous way. Way number 37 is Eino sameach behora. Someone who's not happy, not joyous in rendering rulings. If you have a great sage, someone who knows a lot of Torah, other people come and consult with them. What's the halacha? What's the law? What does the Torah say about this and this situation, this and this circumstance? And if you are a Torah sage, well, you're gonna reference what the Torah says about a given circumstance, and you'll be able to convey that forward. You'll be able to render a ruling. How is it supposed to make you feel when you render a ruling? Eino sameach behora. Someone is not happy. Someone's not enthusiastic about being a judge, being an arbiter, about rendering a ruling. That is actually a way to wisdom. So the previous way to wisdom was to not have a swelled heart, to not be so confident and cocky about how much you know. And here we see that how that manifests itself. Many of the commentaries connect way number 36 and way number 37. How does it manifest itself where you're not so happy, you're not so confident, You're not so cocky about your ruling because, well, you're humble enough to know that, well, maybe you made a mistake. And you're not prideful enough to think that you know so much. A way to achieve more Torah is to maintain a degree of uncertainty and lack of confidence when rendering a ruling. And the truth is, as we shall see, there are endless variables that can be part of a given discussion. Someone asks you a halachic question. In effect, they're telling you, I want you to scan all the books of the Talmud and all the commentaries and the Jerusalem Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, and the Rambam, and the Shulchan Aruch, and all the commentaries, and tell me everything that could possibly be a factor or a variable in this question. To know all of that, you have to be a real master. And to not know that maybe you missed something. And how many different episodes and stories and narratives and rulings in the Talmud that you don't immediately connect to this question at hand, they may be quite relevant. And you don't even know. You didn't make that connection. If you open up the works of responsa, the response literature, the Shilas V'Tshuvos, there's thousands, tens of thousands of books of responsa. Responsa means you ask a question to a great sage, and the great sage will analyze the situation and give a response, a halachic ruling. And what's amazing is that the connections that the great sages find. You think a question with the laws of Shabbos. If I study the book of Shabbos, I'll know the laws. Yeah, but every single other book in the Talmud also has some discussion about Shabbos. And if you miss that, well, you might have missed a very important factor in this dilemma. And if you're happy, you're ruling, I know this for sure, I'm happy, here you go, spit it out. You're ignoring the fact that the Torah is vaster than what you think it is. And you're maybe a bit too confident, and you're not appreciating the depth and the breadth and the scope of Torah. What's amazing is that the Talmud records that even the sages of the Talmud, this is 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, the sages were on a completely different stratosphere than the sages that we have today. And even the sages of the Talmudic era were reluctant to render rulings if the questioner wanted to know only the opinion of Torah. You come to a sage, I don't want your opinion. I want the opinion of Torah exclusively. Sage says, I'm not going to do that to you. Because it's possible there's parts of Torah that I'm not even aware are pertinent to this question. So the sages of 2,000 years ago, they were unwilling to commit that their rulings were 100% aligned with the opinion of the Torah. Because again, the variables are endless. There's a famous and quite humorous episode that happened about 100 years ago, a little more, probably more than 120 years ago, with the great Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik was one of the great Talmudic minds of recent years, recent eras. And in fact, he was the pioneer behind the system of Talmudic study that dominates the yeshiva world today. He created a revolution in intense and penetrating analysis of the Talmud that is the method, the primary method that is used in all yeshivos, almost all yeshivas today. And he was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin. And then when it shuttered, he moved just to the city of Brisk, of Brest-Litovsk, as it's known, in Lithuania and Russia. And he was the rabbi there, and the students, the great students from all over the world, would coalesce by him to study by him. So he had like an unofficial yeshiva in his hometown. But he would never, well, never. He was very reluctant to render any halachic ruling. Why? Because he could see both sides of every question and could prove both sides. Talmud even tells a story about Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, any dilemma, he would have 149, 150 proofs one way, 150 proofs the other way. So how do you have a ruling? You need to be a little bit ignorant to render a ruling. You have to rely on the sages, rely on the sources. But the Talmud, but the story goes that it was by his son's wedding or wedding celebration. I read different versions of the story. There's a few different versions. The story got embellished, but it was a celebration related to the wedding of a son. It was either the wedding or it was the Sheva Brachos, the after wedding celebration. And there was a big pot of meat that was going to be served, and a little bit of non-kosher meat fell inside of it. The meat fell in, and then they quickly scooped up the meat, but a little bit of the meat or the flavor went in now. So is this pot kosher or not? That's an important halachic question. Today we go to H-E-B and you get kosher meat. It's very inexpensive relatively. But people today are living relatively affluent lives. And, you think about the times in the shtetl, people had very, very little meat. Maybe a little bit of chicken for Shabbos. There's this big pot of meat now for this celebration. I was looking forward to it. A little bit of non-kosher meat fell inside of it. You quickly scoop it out, but there are halachos of, okay, well, there's some now non-kosher flavor in it. And how much meat fell in, and how much flavor fell in, and what percentage of it is, and is it nullified? There's a principle that there is the nullification. When something becomes negligible, a tiny little drop, you have a huge pot of meat, a tiny drop of milk falls inside of it. Meat's still kosher, because the milk is considered to be negligible. It's less than a 60th. It's like, less than 1%. It's like negligible. Just like, when you read on the label, it says that it has no high fructose corn syrup. It has 1 or 2 or 3% or 5%, but that's not enough to register. The government says, well, that's negligible. So there's a halachic principle of something being negligible from a halachic perspective, and therefore it's not considered to be, it wouldn't render it non-kosher. A little bit of meat fell in. Is it kosher? Is it not kosher? And there were a bunch of rabbis there. Everyone wanted to render their opinion. So they weren't sure exactly what percentage of the meat had fallen. Was it a 60th or was it not a 60th? Which adds another variable to it. It may or may not have been a 60th. If it's more than a 60th, well, then it's not negligible. If it's less than a 60th, then it is negligible. We don't know how much it is. We didn't measure it. So what now? So one of the rabbis there says, well, we have a principle. There's a lot of inside baseball here going on over here. We have a principle called Safek Derabanan Lekula. When there's a matter of doubt of rabbinic severity, not biblical severity, the rabbis made a decree, we got to follow it, but there are certain rules. If you're unsure, if there's a suffix, there's a doubt, there's an uncertainty, then we tend to be lenient when it's a rabbinic circumstance versus when it's a real Torah law, original Torah law, then even in case of doubt, we are machmir, we are stringent. So here there's a question of min b'mino. Min b'mino. When the mixture is two of the same type, you have kosher meat, non-kosher meat, but they're both bovine meat. One of them wasn't slaughtered properly, or was slaughtered properly, was found to be a treifa afterwards. So it's not like it's pig and cow meat. It's cow meat and cow meat. So that's a case of min b'mino. It's rabbinic, and therefore it's a suffix. It's a doubt. In the case of a doubt, we are lenient, and all the rabbis agree, 100%. Lenient, everyone can eat the meat. And Rabbi Salovich says, yeah, that's true. But because that meat that was slaughtered and found to be a treifa, it was not kosher. So it wasn't processed in the kosher fashion. And it wasn't salted properly. So therefore, there's probably a little bit of blood in it. Kosher meat's always salted to remove the blood. Non-kosher meat's not salted, or at least not salted to remove the blood with the same severity that you would remove blood from meat that you're going to eat. So it is true that the meat is min b'mino. It's the same thing, meat and meat, but there's also blood. And blood is not the same thing as the meat, and therefore it is of Toraitic, a case of a doubt of Toraitic stringency, and therefore if it's a suffix, it's uncertainty, well, we should be machmir. It should be prohibited. So, oh, you're right, it's prohibited. He says, no, maybe it's not prohibited. Because it's cooked blood, and cooked blood is only rabbinically prohibited, so it should be permitted. He says, yeah, well, it's not from the perspective of the animal. It's the blood from a treifa would be biblically prohibited because he brings a source that says that food that emerges from a non-kosher source is not kosher. So even though from the blood perspective, it is maybe not a problem because it was cooked, but from the fact that it's yotzim mina asa, which is a different halachic category, it should be prohibited on that grounds. And the story goes on and on. Every argument that they presented, he brought a counter argument, and so on. And this is just an example. There's a lot of lore about the story because the details. I Googled and tried to find the details because I don't want to give you guys the story. It's not precise, but there's a few different versions of what exactly the arguments were. But the point is that it's very, very hard to say with definitiveness you've covered every single aspect of the Torah in rendering a halachic ruling. So if you're very joyous, you're confident, you're not according the Torah sufficient respect. By the way, in the end, they had to forego the meat. They didn't eat the meat. That's the end of the story. But it goes on. There's a few different variables that are present in that story. I will tell you, this Rabbi Soloveitchik, even though he was the rabbi of the city, he didn't render rulings because of this, because he could see all the different angles. But we have a policy in the Torah that when a rabbinic figure, a bona fide rabbinic figure, renders a ruling, well, that's the ruling, and that's what you follow. So when he would ask his questions to Rabbi Spector, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector was considered the greatest rabbi of the generation, he would say to him, listen, I want an answer, but make it one-word answers. Yes or no, permitted, prohibited. Because if you give me all your arguments, I might be able to disprove them. But if the rabbi gives me a ruling, okay, I can follow that ruling. So he would say, send me a telegram with one word. Yes, no, mutter, aser, and so on. Permitted, prohibited. Don't give me your rationale, because rationale I'll be able to disprove it. Again, because the Torah is that vast, and there are so many potential variables, and in every halachic dilemma, there is an ocean of different perspectives that can be presented. And that's why it's very important that, first of all, why we rely on our antecedents. When you have the sages from years past, they knew so much more Torah than you could even fathom. They give a ruling that is something that you can rely upon, because you're in effect saying that this incredible master of Torah, they came out with a ruling that is reliable. Rely on them, not on your own mastery. See, interesting, even in the times of the Talmud records a prayer that one of the sages of the Talmud would say every time he entered the Beis Medrash, the academy. His prayer was, let me not make any mistakes. Let me not say something which is really permitted that it's prohibited, or vice versa. Something which is pure, let me not say that it is impure, or vice versa. The sages were very not confident. It would be foolish for us to be confident, and again, it will be counterproductive, because we're going to stay on a very surface level and not study more and more and more to gain more and more insight and more information about the Torah and about a given circumstance, a given ruling. The Talmud actually says, no sage has ever gotten it right from the beginning. That the nature of Torah is such that when you start off, you are not only prone to make mistakes, you are definitely going to make mistakes. There's no other way to achieve mistake-free rulings, only if you start with making mistakes. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Because again, it's so vast that your initial assessment is guaranteed to be wrong. Guaranteed. And even once you've gone through that, there's no guarantee that you're going to graduate from that. You start off making blunders, there's no guarantee that you're going to cease making blunders. So again, the possibility of mistakes are endemic to this Torah. You can be happy rendering ruling. You're so sure, you're so confident that you got it all. You covered every base. Really? There are 2 citations in the literature that talk about rendering rulings. One of them talks about someone who's not qualified. They're not qualified. They're not mature in their studies. They haven't studied enough. They're not advanced enough. They're not qualified. But they are irrationally confident and they render rulings nonetheless. It's a big problem. And the Talmud says, they are like a murderer. That's how severe it is. You're going to render a ruling without having the proper aptitude and experience and tutelage. It's murder. Very, very harsh language that the sages use for someone who's not qualified and renders a ruling nonetheless. On the flip side, you have someone who is qualified and they don't want to render a ruling. They're scared, justifiably so. We've seen even the sages were the sages of the Talmud were scared. The Talmud, we talked about this in the past. Talmud says that when you render a ruling, you're imagining in your head that there's knives everywhere. And if I don't tiptoe on the right path, I'm going to get slashed. That's how serious you have to take this process of rendering a ruling. It's life and death. So you're a great sage and you are qualified. You don't want to do it. It's too scary. Talmud says, in that case, also you're like a murderer. If you're not qualified, don't rule. If you are qualified, you cannot shirk this responsibility. You have to rule, as terrifying as it is. And if you don't, that is, again, in the words of the Talmud, it's akin to murder on some level. Certainly that means that no one's eager to do it. Even the ones who are qualified are not so happy about this. I remember when I was in high school, we had one of the Rabbeim, one of the Judaic instructors. He was a great sage. He knew it all. And he was one of the, in addition to his role in the yeshiva, he was also the rabbi, the pulpit rabbi of one of the big established shuls in our city. And he would always say, I don't paskin. Unless you're a paying member, you're a member of my shul, I'm not going to give you a ruling. And he knew it all. Like if he doesn't, he would rule. But okay, he was very reluctant to do it. And he would tell us, I'm not going to give you a psak. Go ask someone else. Go ask someone else. And that's appropriate. He would rule maybe in the capacity that he was officially hired to do, he would do that. But he wouldn't. He's not excited to do it and certainly not happy about it. And that's way number 37. But again, there's 2 ways to, in the words of the Talmud, to murder in this fashion. If you know and don't rule, if you don't know and you do rule. And I'll end up with this very nice observation. The aforementioned Gaon of Vilna, who discovered 2,260 interpretations of one verse in Numbers. He only lived 200 some odd years ago, 250 years ago. You read his writings, you see the connections that he makes. My goodness. Listen to this one. In the Ten Commandments, there are two very famous words. Lo sirtzach, do not murder. Thou shalt not murder. It's one of the Ten Commandments. Pretty straightforward. It's only two words. Lo sirtzach, do not murder. Thou shalt not murder. You'll notice something very, very subtle. You have to really study. You have to really squint to see this. There's something called Tam Elyon. Tam Elyon. What that means is that there's 10 commandments, but not all the commandments are standalone verses. Some of them are multiple verses. To not do idolatry, second commandment, it's a few verses. Shabbos, it's a few verses. So how do you read it from a Torah scroll? Do you read it in a system of verses where every commandment could be split up into a bunch of verses? That's the way it's featured in. You open up a chumash, and you'll see that it's just verses. And there's one way of reading it. The standard way of reading it is the way it's presented in the chumash. However, when they read it in Shul and Shabbos, they read it with what's known as Tam Elyon, which is a different way of reading. We read the Torah, there's the cantillation marks, the Tamim, which it's effectively it's like the punctuation marks of the verses. But it tells you the right way to chant it. And the way it's presented in the Chumash is one way, and there's the Tam Elyon, which is the different way, the alternate way, in which every single one of the commandment is its own verse. So you'll have some of them that are very, very long verses, or apparent verses, because there is no period, so to speak, until the end, and it can be 3-4 verses. And the Tam Elyon, it only ends the sentence once the entire one of the commandment, once the entire commandment is finished. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but anyhow, there's Tam Elyon, Tam Tachton, two different ways to read it. But the words are all the same, right? It's just the cantillation marks and the punctuation marks are different. However, when it says lo sirtzach, thou shalt not murder, in one it says lo sirtzach, and in one it says lo sirtzach. And one means thou shalt not murder, and one means thou shalt not murder. It means the same thing. It means the same thing. But one's spelled with a kamatz, sirtzach, and one's spelled with a patach, sirtzach. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not murder. What is the difference between lo sirtzach with the kamatz and lo sirtzach with a patach? We have no idea. Like it means the same thing, right? The words mean the same thing. Sirtzach, it's the same word. Don't murder. So why is one spelled with the kamatz, one spelled with the patach? We don't know. Comes along the Gaon of Vilna and says, Patach, Poteach, which is the name of the Nekuda of Lo Sirtzach, Patach. It means to open. Poteach, open. Petach, an opening. Patach means to open. Lo Sirtzach, with the kamatz means to close. A kamitza is to close. Gaon of Vilna says that this is hinting to us of the two types of murder. There's a murder when you open, someone who doesn't know, and they open their mouth, and they teach, even they don't know, they're really ruling. It's like a murderer. And kamatz is when someone closes. They do know, and they don't open their mouth. That's also a type of murder. Hinted to again in this, this is a level of insight, of penetrating insight, of scrutiny to the Torah that we cannot fathom. Different ways that it's pronounced in the Tam Elyon, Tam Tachton of the Ten Commandments, Lo Sirtzach versus Lo Sirtzach. To us, we wouldn't even notice it for sure. And if we did notice it, we wouldn't be able to determine why. And of course, we may say, "Oh, okay, it doesn't matter. That's a mistake." Everything matters. Everything is with utmost precision. And the Gaon of Vilna is able to reveal to us, well, the Talmud says there's two types of murderer. One who opens their mouth when they shouldn't, one who closes their mouth when they shouldn't. And that's hitting to kamatz means to close. Patach means to open. There's two ways to achieve murder in rendering rulings. That's hinted to in the difference between the Tam Elyon and Tam Tachton of the 10 Commandments. Fascinating stuff. But this is the way number 37. When you're a judge, hopefully you're worthy to do that. And don't render rulings if you're not worthy. But even then, Eino sameach behora. You're not happy, you're not enthusiastic about it. Why? Because you realize how vast Torah is. When you realize how vast Torah is and how prone you are to make mistakes, you will study more. And thus, this is a way to wisdom, a way to achieve Torah. Way number 37. Eino sameach behora. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.